some of Chris Hedges' article, because he always puts it so well. I'm lucky to be somewhat friends with Chris, as much as one can be friends with Chris. No, I'm kidding. Chris has friends. But I don't get to see him that often. But he's writing for Sheer Post. Palestinians speak the language of violence Israel taught them. The indiscriminate shootings of Israelis by Hamas and other Palestinian resistance organizations, the kidnapping of civilians, the barrage of rockets into Israel, drone attacks on a variety of targets from tanks to automated machine gun nests are the familiar language of the Israeli occupier. Israel has spoken this blood-soaked language of violence to the Palestinians since Zionist militias seized more than 78% of historic Palestine, destroyed some 530 Palestinian villages and cities, and killed about 15,000 Palestinians in more than 70 massacres. Some 750,000 Palestinians were ethnically cleansed between 1947 and 1949 to create the State of Israel in 1948. And that's what I was mentioning earlier, that it was, a genocide level of mass murder. 750,000 Palestinians murdered through those few years. Israel's response to these armed incursions will be a genocidal assault on Gaza. I mean, it already has been, and it will continue. Israel will kill dozens of Palestinians for every Israeli killed, which is the same ratio we've seen through the years. That is nothing new. That horrific ratio of 12 to 1 or whatever, 10 to 1 of murder by Israel is what we've seen for years. Prime Minister Netanyahu warned Palestinians in Gaza on Sunday to leave now because Israel is going to turn all Hamas hiding places into rubble. That's what he said. But where are Palestinians in Gaza supposed to go? Israel and Egypt blockade the land borders. There is no exit by air or sea, which are controlled by Israel. They literally can't get out, and yet they're told to leave. It's hilarious that level of propaganda from Netanyahu is respected, or that anyone believes it. Well, why didn't they leave? If they didn't want to be killed, then they should have left. And that guy would have said leaved. The collective retribution, to continue from the article, against innocence is a familiar tactic employed by colonial rulers. We used it against Native Americans and later in the Philippines and Vietnam. The Germans used it against the Herero and Namaqua in Namibia. The British in Kenya and Malaya. The Nazis used it in areas they occupied in the Soviet Union, Eastern and Central Europe. Israel follows the same playbook. Death for death, atrocity for atrocity. But it is always the occupier who initiates this macabre dance and trades piles of corpses for higher piles of corpses. This is not to defend the war crimes by either side. It is not to rejoice in the attacks. And, it sucks that we have to keep saying that, but trying to give the context that your mainstream media refuses to give you, for good reason, they're propagandists, but refuses to give you. We're trying to give you that context. Me, Chris Hedges, so many others on the independent media side are trying to give you that context. And people act like giving you context is somehow endorsing the murders of either side. Fucking no, it's not. It's not. What's endorsing murders of innocent civilians is fucking whitewashing them, ignoring them, acting like they didn't happen. And that's what your mainstream media will give you. What does Israel or the world community expect? He says, how can you trap 2.3 million people in Gaza, half of whom are unemployed, in one of the most densely populated spots on the planet for 16 years, reduce the lives of its residents, half of whom are children, to a subsistence level, deprive them of basic medical supplies, food, water, and electricity, use attack aircraft, artillery, mechanized units, missiles, naval guns, and infantry units to randomly slaughter unarmed civilians and not expect a violent response? As I said yesterday, if I tell you, hey, you're storing a bunch of flammable materials by that, a bunch of kindling and open wiring, and there's sparks shooting out, and I think it's going to cause a fire and burn down your house. Telling you that and saying, I think that's a terrible idea, you really shouldn't do that. That is not to endorse the fire when it happens. It's not to go, oh, yeah, I love seeing that fire burn your house down. That's awesome because I told you this is what happens. So telling you that this is what happens when you have a horrific apartheid state is not to endorse killing when it does take place. A couple more things from Chris. The more violence the colonizer expends to subdue the occupied, the more it transforms itself into a monster. The current government of Israel is populated by Jewish extremists, fanatic Zionists, and religious bigots who are dismantling Israeli democracy and calling for the wholesale expulsion or murder of Palestinians, including those who live inside Israel. And there are many Palestinians, by the way, that live, and other Arabs that live inside Israel, and they have some rights. They don't have equivalent rights as many of the Jews do. But the next stage of this struggle, Chris writes, will be a massive campaign of industrial slaughter in Gaza by Israel, which has already begun. Israel is convinced greater levels of violence will finally crush Palestinian aspirations. Israel is mistaken. The terror Israel inflicts is the terror it will get. All well said. And, I think one of the most important things is Israel continues to become the monster they claim to be trying to suppress or stop or rid themselves of. And they've become the monster that they ostensibly wanted to leave behind with Nazi Germany. They have become the Nazis, at least in their behavior. And it's the response of those who have seen genocide, and many in Israel, many have survived the Holocaust, many have mothers and fathers who survived the Holocaust or didn't survive the Holocaust. My I guess step grandfather is the term. My grandmother's second husband was one member of his family that survived the Holocaust, and almost all the others were killed. And he was the grandfather I knew more growing up. So really, my grandfather saw most of his family exterminated in the Holocaust. And that's true for probably most Israelis, that they have some connection to the Holocaust in that way. And that is a reason to not become exactly this, exactly what they have become, and a reason to not behave the way they're behaving now, which is perpetrating genocide, and the way they've behaved for decades against the Palestinians.